They listed my house on a vacation rental site while I was 4 states away, attending my nephew's college graduation. I didn't find out because they told me. I didn't find out because my daughter called. I found out because I came home a day early, drove 2.5 hours from the airport with a trunk full of souvenirs and that particular loneliness that comes from celebrating someone else's milestone, and pulled into my own driveway to find a laminated card zip-tied to my porch railing. At first, I thought it was some county notice. The waterline people had been promising to replace for 3 years maybe, or a storm drainage update. I walked toward it in my good traveling shoes, purse still on my shoulder, and I read it. Check-in Esgents, Tin Mountain, getaway welcome guests. Keypad code is listed below. Wi-Fi password on the refrigerator. Please remove shoes at the door. Enjoy your stay. I read it twice, then I tried the door. My key, the one I'd kept on a ring with a small enamel bluebird charm that my husband Ted bought me at a craft fair in 2003, found nothing to turn. The old brass handle I had polished every spring for 29 years was gone. In its place was a sleek silver keypad, blinking at me like an eye that had decided not to recognize my face. I pressed my hand flat against the door for a moment and breathed. This was my house. Ted and I bought it in 1995, barely enough for a down payment, both of us terrified and certain at the same time. We painted every room ourselves. We planted the magnolia in the backyard the summer after we paid off the car, as a small celebration of having a little money left over for something beautiful. I paid off the mortgage in 2018, held the closing letter in both hands, and cried. Ted laughed at me. Then he cried. 4 years later, he was gone, and the house was all I had left of the life we built. I stepped back and studied the windows. The curtains were different. Mine were pale yellow, thin enough for morning light to pass through like honey. These were thick and dark and heavy. I bought blackout curtains at a yard sale 2 years ago and never used them. They'd been folded in the hall closet since. Someone had hung them in my living room. I got back in the car. I sat in the driveway for several minutes, and then I opened my phone and typed in the name from the laminated card. The listing appeared in seconds. 78 reviews. 4.5 stars. Photographs of my grandmother's quilt described as cozy vintage decor. My cast iron skillet on the stove, labeled fully equipped kitchen. My back garden, with Ted's magnolia just visible at the edge of the frame, called a private outdoor oasis. The nightly rate was $185. I had not been asked. I had not been told. I put the car in reverse and drove 3 miles to the Best Western on the highway. My daughter Annalise had always been the planner in the family. Even as a girl, she organized her dresser by color and kept a notebook where she tracked her allowance to the cent. I used to brag about that, said she'd run a company one day. I wasn't wrong about her capability. What I miscalculated was whose interests she might eventually apply it to. She'd married my son-in-law Perry 6 years ago. He was a man with an opinion about every room he walked into, and the confidence of someone who had never once been told those opinions weren't welcome. He called me by my first name. He interrupted me in conversations, not angrily, just consistently, the way water wears away stone without ever seeming to try. He had a term for every piece of my home that offended him. The porch swing blocked the sightline. The wind chimes weren't his thing. The small ceramic rooster I'd kept above the stove since 1997 was a little much. Annalise laughed when he said that. Not cruelly. Just automatically, the way a person laughs when they've been married long enough to absorb another person's taste and stop noticing the moment it replaced their own. They moved in 8 months ago. Just while the condo renovation wraps up, Annalise said. The renovation was always taking longer than expected. I didn't push. She was my daughter, and I would clear every drawer I owned if it meant having her close again. Perry started with the garage. Reorganized it, he said, in a way that resulted in Ted's fishing gear ending up in black garbage bags near the curb. I found them before the truck came. Said nothing. Then the kitchen cabinets. He bought a label maker and reorganized the shelves into a system that made no sense in my own kitchen, in my own house, where I had been finding the coffee without assistance for 3 decades. I rearranged things back. There was a tightness around his mouth after that which never fully went away. Didn't like me. I knew it the way you know a storm before you can see it. You feel the pressure change. You smell something different in the air. He was never overtly rude. That would have given me something to point to. He was polite in the precise clinical way of a man who has decided you don't warrant his respect, but understands it would cost him something to show it. 3 weeks in, I overheard them in the kitchen late at night. I'd come down for water and stopped in the hallway when I heard my name. "She'll be gone almost a week," Perry said. His voice was low and practical. The voice of a man going over a logistics problem. 4 days minimum. That's more than enough time to get the listing up, take the photos, handle the first few bookings. A pause. Annalise quieter. What if she finds out before we have a chance to explain it? She won't. A beat. And even if she does, you know how she is. She'll make a face and say something, and then let it go. I stood in the dark hallway in my nightgown and understood everything. I understood what they were planning. I understood what it said about what they thought of me. And I understood with a clarity that surprised me by its steadiness, exactly what I was going to do. I finished packing for Georgia the next morning and said nothing at all. My nephew's graduation was wonderful. He walked across that stage, and I cheered until the woman beside me glanced over startled, and I didn't care one bit. I took pictures. I ate barbecue at a folding table in someone's backyard with the whole family laughing too loud, and for 3 days I let myself be completely present. Not bracing, not anticipating, just there. On the 3rd night I called my old friend Midge, who has known me since we were both 23, new to the same school. She in the front office and me in the classroom down the hall. She has been present for every important thing in my life, including Ted's last weeks and the grief that came after. And she has never once told me what I wanted to hear when what I needed was the truth. I told her what I'd overheard. There was a silence on the phone. Then she said, "Do you have the deed?" "In my filing cabinet, always has been." "Driver's license with the address?" "Of course." "Then you know exactly what to do," she said. "Don't go in angry. Go in prepared." I flew home a day early. I drove straight to the house. The Best Western was clean enough. The bed was firm, and the air conditioner worked, and the parking lot was well lit. I was grateful for all of it. What I was not grateful for was sitting on the edge of that mattress past midnight, with my phone in my hands, scrolling through the listing for my house. My bedroom, where Ted and I had slept for 22 years, where I still kept to my side of the bed out of habit even now, 6 years on, had been photographed and captioned "the primary suite." Someone had made the bed with white linens that weren't mine, arranged a small tray with locally made candles, and set a succulent in a clay pot on my nightstand. The nightstand Ted built from a kit one rainy weekend in 2008 because he'd wanted to try something with his hands. The succulent was in a clay pot with a hand-lettered tag that said, "Enjoy." I put the phone down. I lay back on the motel bed in my clothes and stared at the ceiling and thought about what it means to be erased. Not dramatically, not all at once, but incrementally, one cupboard at a time, one laminated card at a time, one photograph of your grandmother's quilt used to sell the illusion of someone else's home. I thought about Ted, about how he used to say that a house either fits you or it doesn't, and ours fit us from the first day we walked through the door. I thought about how it had fit me still, even after he was gone, even when it was too quiet and too big and too full of the specific weight of absence. It had still been mine. I had still belonged to it, and it to me. I did not sleep much. At 7 in the morning, I called the Knox County Sheriff's Office. The deputy who answered was careful and thorough. He asked me to come in and bring what I had. I brought the deed, my driver's license, and 31 years of property tax statements I'd kept in a folder in the filing cabinet because Ted had been meticulous about paperwork, and I had inherited his habits. By 10 o'clock, a sheriff's deputy was at my front door with me standing beside him. Annalise answered in her robe. She'd dyed her hair since I left. A warm copper color I might have complimented under different circumstances. She looked at me, then at the deputy, then back at me, and her face moved through several expressions in less time than it takes to read them. "Mom," she said, "you're back early." "I am," I said. The deputy explained the situation clearly and without drama. Perry appeared from the kitchen, phone in hand, voice already calibrated to the particular register of a man who has prepared his arguments in advance and is disappointed to find the audience isn't interested. He said a good deal about mutual understanding and flexible arrangements and the reasonable assumption of ongoing access. The deputy listened, then he explained again. It took 40 minutes, then I walked into my house. I moved through each room slowly. The blackout curtains came down first. I folded them and set them on the hall table. My yellow curtains were in the closet, folded just as I'd left them, because no one had thought to put them back. I hung them back in the window and the light came through the way it always had, thin and golden and particular to that window at that hour. And I stood in it for a moment with my eyes closed. The ceramic rooster was in the garage in a box labeled Decor RME. I washed it under the kitchen tap and set it back above the stove. The succulent was on my nightstand. I moved it to the windowsill in the hall bathroom because it probably needed more light, and because a living thing shouldn't be blamed for where it was placed. I spent the afternoon moving their things carefully to the front porch. Not thrown, not dropped. Folded where folding was appropriate. Stacked where stacking made sense. Perry's toolbox and rowing machine. Annalise's winter clothes still on the good hangers. Her perfume bottles wrapped in a pillowcase so they wouldn't knock against each other. Her laptop bag by the door, her silk robe, folded with the sash tucked inside. A jogger passed on the sidewalk and slowed slightly, eyebrows raised. I gave a small wave. He kept going. When they came back with a borrowed truck, Perry stood at the edge of the driveway looking at the porch. I don't have a precise word for his expression. It wasn't shame, exactly. It was something adjacent to it. The face of a person who had not genuinely expected consequences. Annalise walked toward me. "Mom," she started. "You have 30 minutes, I said. "And after today, please call before you come back for anything else." Perry said something under his breath. I didn't ask him to repeat it. They loaded what they needed. When the truck was full enough, Annalise stood by the passenger door and looked at the house for a moment. At the yellow curtains back in the window, at the shape of my rooster visible above the kitchen sink from the driveway. Then she looked at me. "I didn't think it would go this way," she said. "I know," I said. "That was the plan." She had no answer for that. She got in the truck. That evening, I called Midge. She laughed and cried and said, "Good for you." So many times, it started to feel like a hymn. I made soup from what remained in my refrigerator. Theirs, mostly, though I found my own stock in the back of the freezer, behind a bag of quinoa I'd never have bought for myself. I ate at the kitchen table with the radio on low. Nobody critiqued the meal. Nobody asked if there was a gluten-free alternative. The next morning, I called Lionel Sutton, the lawyer who'd handled Ted's estate. Same firm, same extension. He remembered my name without checking. I told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, the way good lawyers and good friends do. "You want to make sure this can't happen again," he said when I finished. "I want to make sure no one can treat this house like it belongs to them when it doesn't," I said. "And I want it in writing." We met that Friday. He drafted updated documents, language about sole ownership rights, a revised will that removed automatic inheritance assumptions, and a formal notice to my daughter and her husband stating that unauthorized commercial use of my property had occurred and that any future violation may constitute grounds for legal action. Not a threat, a fact stated plainly so there would be no misunderstanding. He also helped me contact the rental platform. 2 phone calls, a copy of the deed. The listing was down within 24 hours. 7 upcoming reservations were canceled. I sent each guest a personal message explaining that the property had been listed without the owner's knowledge or consent. 3 of them wrote back to say they were sorry to hear it. One said she hoped I was doing all right. I was, getting there. Annalise called on a Sunday 3 weeks later, not a text. A phone call that rang long enough that I could tell she'd had to build herself up to pressing the button. "I wanted to explain," she said. "You don't need to explain how it happened," I said. "I understand how. I'd like to understand why." She was quiet for a moment. Perry convinced me it made sense. That the house was there, that we were already using it. He made it sound like we were making something useful out of something that was just sitting idle. I was not idle, I said. I was at my nephew's graduation. I know. The house was not idle either. It was waiting for me to come home. Another pause. I should have said no to him, she said. I kept telling myself you'd never find out, and then it would just be over and done, and we'd never have to have this conversation. I knew it was wrong. She stopped. I know how that sounds. It sounds like you hoped a wrong thing would go unnoticed long enough that it wouldn't need to be right anymore. She didn't argue. Are you going to be able to forgive me? She asked. It was the most honest thing she'd said in the entire conversation, and I gave it the silence it deserved. I love you, I said finally. That is not in question. But some things have changed. You should know that. She asked what things. I told her about Lionel, the will, the property documentation. I told her plainly and without malice. She was quiet for a long time after that. Not upset, or not only upset, I think she may have understood more than she let on. Before we hung up, she said, I noticed you put the yellow curtains back. I did. I always liked those, she said, quietly, even when I didn't say so. I didn't respond, but I stayed with that for a while. A package arrived 3 weeks later, my address in Annalise's handwriting. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, was Ted's old fishing hat, the one Perry had bagged with the fishing gear that first month, the one I'd retrieved from the curb pile and set on the shelf in my closet and then lost track of in all the upheaval. She must have found it when she packed. Kept it separately. No note. But she'd ironed the brim. Ted never ironed it. It was always a little lopsided, always a little soft at the crown from years of being worn and set down and picked up again. That was exactly how I liked it. I hung it on the hook by the back door, the hook where Ted used to put it when he came in from the yard. It looked right there. It looked like something that had finally made its way back to where it was always supposed to be. Midge is coming to visit in the spring. We're going to put in an herb garden along the back fence, and she wants lavender and I want strawberries, and we will probably compromise and end up with both. The magnolia has started showing buds early this year. Ted always said an early bloom meant a warm season ahead. He was usually right about that sort of thing. My daughter calls every Sunday now. The conversations are shorter than they used to be and more deliberate. And I think that's probably as it should be for a while. Trust is not something you switch back on. It grows the way the magnolia grows, slowly according to its own schedule, and you cannot rush it by wanting it more. But it was never really about the keypad, or the laminated check-in card, or the 4.5-star listing with photographs of my grandmother's quilt. It was about whether I was willing to stand for being treated as though my life, my history, my 31 years in a house as I paid for, my 29 years beside a man I loved, whether any of that added up to a voice worth hearing. It does. I am still here. I still make my coffee in my own kitchen, still watch the afternoon light move across the back wall the way it always has, the way it will long after I am gone. The rooster is above the stove. The yellow curtains catch the morning. The hat is on the hook by the back door. Nobody gets to decide what your life is worth except you. And I am done lending that authority to anyone who hasn't earned the right to hold it.